Hey everyone, Spider-Man the animated series is truly a classic. Everything about it is great, except for one thing that fans have been wondering about for years. In the last episode, Spider-Man teams up with Madam Web to search for Mary Jane, who got lost somewhere in the multiverse. We have all heard the question, did Spider-Man finally find Mary Jane, multiple times, but in this video I will finally give you the answer. John Semper, the producer and main writer of the animated series, has finally finished the script for the 66th and final episode, and he has shared it with us. The script is 92 pages long, divided into 6 acts, and if the series ever gets fully produced, it will be about 40 minutes long. Without further ado, let's dive in. So, the 66th episode of Spider-Man's animated series, Peter finds Mary Jane. The episode starts with Spider-Man and Madam Web flying through a time portal and seeing MJ. Spider-Man almost catches her, but Madam Web's chair starts acting weird. MJ disappears into the portal, and Madam Web and Spidey end up in one of the parallel realities, in the middle of nowhere. Because Madam Web's chair broke, she vanishes and asks Peter to find a way to fix it. Peter looks around and sees nobody. Just in case, Spider-Man leaves a spider bug on the chair and starts wandering through the desert. After a while, in dense fog, he encounters an old locomotive speeding by. Spidey, happy that somebody's living here after all, jumps on it. It brings Peter to Victorian-era London, and what the newspaper reveal, it's September 1888 in this reality. Almost immediately in London, Spider-Man confronts Carnage, who is attacking civilians and claims he came to London through Tony Stark's portal. Turns he has already killed several people, and here they call him Jack the Ripper. Spider-Man engages in a fight with him, during which Carnage breaks his web shooters, defeats him, and decides not to kill him yet, so he has someone to fight in this reality. Spider-Man leaves the battleground, and people on the streets think he is the mysterious Jack the Ripper. Parker finds suitable steampunk-style clothes for himself, but then changes back into his Spider-Man suit, and because his web shooters aren't working, he moves through the city via rooftops. Meanwhile, through the time portal in the same London, Mary Jane arrives. She doesn't remember what happened to her, and she is aided by Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, famous victims of Jack the Ripper. It's also revealed that in London, there are alternative versions of J. Jonah Jameson and Flash Thompson, with Flash acting as Jonah's assistant here. In the city, Spider-Man encounters the Green Goblin, who flies past him on a glider. Spidey thinks he stole money from the bank and tries to stop him. Interestingly, the Green Goblin has no idea who Spider-Man is and doesn't understand what he is saying. Together on the glider, they fly into a circus filled with smoke. Goblin manages to jump off the glider and disappears. Spidey gets attacked by big snakes and a griffin at the circus. Peter defeats the griffin, which turns out to be a robot. After that, Mysterio emerges from the smoke. Spidey quickly defeats Mysterio with his spider sense. Then the Green Goblin reappears and shows Spidey that he was just disturbing flyers from the circus around the city. He takes off his mask, revealing Harry Osborn underneath. Mysterio turns out to be Quentin Beck under the mask, and says they're just doing business and don't want to harm anyone. Spidey also shows his real face and admits his mistake. That evening, they have a dinner at the circus. Peter proposes a deal to them. He will catch Jack the Ripper for their show if Quentin fixes his web shooters. Mysterio is happy with the offer and agrees right away. The next day, they head to an inventor who turns out to be Herbert Wells, known in our reality as a science fiction writer. Parker's spider sense goes off at Wells' house, and he discovers a time machine that Herbert has been working on for a long time. Peter realizes that he and Madam Web fell out of the portal because of Wells' interference in time. At Peter's request, Herbert shuts down the time machine to avoid causing more harm to the multiverse. Using his spider bug tracker device, Spider-Man leads everyone to Madam Web's chair and explains that they are facing a working time machine. He suggests Wells fix it, and he sets off to research for Mary Jane, suspecting she might also be in London. An interesting idea pops into his head, which he immediately decides to check out. For this, he heads to Baker Street. His spider sense doesn't fail him, and there he meets Sherlock Holmes himself and Dr. Watson. Sherlock Holmes deduces that Mary Jane should be sought in Whitechapel, Whitechapel, an area of London. Peter thanks the detective and leaves. Holmes and Watson decide to follow Peter, thinking he looks suspicious and is hiding something. From afar, they see Peter climbing up a wall, and after that, they also decide to head to Whitechapel to figure out what's going on. In the evening, Mary Jane, Elizabeth, and Catherine also arrive in Whitechapel, hoping Mary will finally understand how she ended up here. J. Jonah Jameson and Flash also head there, busy writing a story about Jack the Ripper. Mary meets Flash Thompson and is very happy to see him. However, Flash doesn't recognize her. Elizabeth and Catherine decide to leave her to talk to Flash and continue on through Whitechapel. Carnage attacks them and brutally kills. Right after that, he attacks Flash and Mary, but hesitates when he sees and recognizes Mary Jane. Finally, Spider-Man himself appears in Whitechapel. He takes off his mask, says he is Peter Parker, and kisses Mary Jane. After that, her memory returns. Carnage attacks Spider-Man, kidnaps MJ, and flies away with her. He dashes across the rooftops of London while MJ tries to escape the monster's clutches. Suddenly, a portal appears in front of them, from which emerges a terrifying giant spider. The spider leaps onto Carnage, causing him to fall on the ground. Mysterio emerges from the smoke. 6 enormous demonic creatures emerge from the dense fog around them. Spider-Man arrives. Suddenly, Mysterio gets shot, and he grabs his arm. It turns out to be J. Jonah Jameson who shot him. He is glad he got his gun back, and says he will rid London of monsters and put an end to the series of killings in Whitechapel. But Jameson is stopped by Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. Because Mysterio was injured, his demons disappear one by one. Carnage realizes it was an illusion, grabs Mary Jane and flees. Quentin asks Spider-Man to ignore his wound and continue chasing Carnage. Peter webs up Jameson so he won't harm anyone else and sets off to find Mary Jane with Carnage. Inspired by Sherlock Holmes' deduction, he figures out where he can find Carnage, on Tower Bridge, where he heads. Spider-Man climbs one of the towers, and turns out to be right. Carnage comes to him, holding Mary Jane. After a brief conversation, Carnage throws MJ off the bridge. In the air, she is suddenly caught by the Green Goblin on his glider. Spider-Man and Carnage start fighting on the bridge, during which Carnage manages to tie up Spidey with his symbiote. Suddenly, a goblin bomb explodes near him and Carnage, and the villain falls down. Spider-Man manages to escape. He comes up with a clever plan. He jumps off the bridge and spins through the streets of London on his web. Carnage follows him. The Green Goblin helps Parker and tries to bomb Carnage, but he flies away when he runs out of bombs. Spider-Man jumps onto a tall building and climbs up. Carnage doesn't give up and climbs after him. They climb almost to the top of the building, where Carnage transforms his hand into a set of knives and prepares to kill Spider-Man. Suddenly, it turns out that Spidey lured Carnage to Big Ben. It's midnight and the clock tower starts ringing loudly. Each toll of the bell causes the symbiote to separate more and more from Cletus Cassidy, until it finally completely detaches from him and presumably dissolves from the unbearable sound. Cassidy says he can't live without the symbiote and jumps off Big Ben. Spider-Man, not expecting this turn of events, tries to catch him with his web, but misses. Cassidy falls into the River Thames. Spider-Man thinks that Cassidy is dead. He then retrieves the camera he had previously placed on the tower, which had been taking pictures all this time. He plans to develop the photos with the so-called Jack the Ripper at Herbert Wells, and give them to Quentin and Harry for their circus, as a reward for their help. At night, Peter and Mary Jane come home to Herbert Wells. It turns out that Quentin is in the hospital and Harry is looking after him. Jameson, on the other hand, ended up in the police station, where he was escorted by Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. Herbert Wells says he seems to have figured out how Madame Web's chair works, and turns it on. At that moment, spider sense starts tingling. Everyone turns around and sees Carnage, who survived, breaking into the house through the window. He takes Mary Jane hostage and explains that the symbiote found its way into the Thames, where it saved Cletus from death. It restored his strength, and then Carnage followed Spidey to Herbert Wells' house. Carnage sits in Madame Web's chair, holding MJ hostage. He presses the buttons and the chair starts vibrating heavily, which clearly doesn't sit well with his symbiote. Mary Jane manages to break free, and she runs to Peter. Carnage grows larger, his body starts flickering, and he becomes transparent. Eventually he explodes and disappears. However, the chair remains intact and undamaged. Moments later, Madame Web appears in the chair. She explains that after it was activated, the chair found her across the entire multiverse and brought her specifically to this dimension. It turns out that Carnage was torn apart, because only Madame Web can control the chair. Peter takes off his mask, saying he still can't believe he found Mary Jane. They kiss each other. Together, they are once again sucked into the time vortex. Suddenly, Peter Parker and Madame Web find themselves outside of time and space. Madame Web tells him that Mary Jane has been safely taken home. She wanted to show Spider-Man something. Many oval rifts appear around them, through which various parallel universes can be seen. In each of them, there is a Spider-Man. Madame Web shows Peter the reality where Spider-Man is Miles Morales, the reality with Spider-Gwen, and the one where Spider-Man is Aunt May. Madame Web says that in all realities, spider abilities turn people into heroes who protect the weak and innocent. She asks Peter not to forget that with great power comes great responsibility, and she sends Peter back to his reality. Spider-Man sits on the gargoyle and says the very phrase he first uttered in this animated series.
New York City. If only everything down there was really as peaceful as it looks from up here.
He jumps off the building and swings through the streets of the metropolis on his web. And this was the end of Spider-Man, the animated series. But you, my dear viewers, click on the like button, subscribe to the channel and write what you think about it in the comments below. We'll see you soon.